Hello, my name is Caitlin Emmerich. I'm a 27-year-old female living with Fabry disease. Currently, I'm living on the west coast of Tasmania in a town of about 2,000 people called Queenstown, not Queenstown, New Zealand. Prior to that, I was living on the south coast of New South Wales for 25 years in my family home. And it was a career change that brought me to Tassie. I trained as a lawyer and spent 2 years in the legal profession. And 2 years ago, I then began retraining to become a high school teacher. So currently I'm teaching mathematics at a school here in Queenstown, and my partner and I live here in our 1-bedroom unit, which has a view of the Queen River, which some of you may be familiar with, is quite infamous here in Tasmania. I want to share my journey living with Fabry disease for the past 27 years and share some tips that I've sort of developed over the last 27 years, bearing in mind that I have many more years living with Fabry disease ahead of me. So I can only share from those 27 years, of course. And I want to share, I suppose, how I'm managing my disease at present. And that includes how I'm planning for the future. So for context, I have always known that I have Fabry disease because my father was diagnosed with Fabry in his 30s. So certainly my parents knew that if they were to have a daughter naturally, that she would have Fabry disease. And that's exactly what happened. So my dad has had visible symptoms of Fabry for as long as I can remember. And this meant that he received Fabry treatment fortnightly until recently. He was living a pretty normal life from the exterior until about 5 years ago. So until 5 years ago, he was working for himself, and Fabry was a big factor in his career decisions. Working for himself meant that he had flexibility to take time off for medical appointments, for days when he wasn't feeling well, etc. But yeah, until about 5 years ago, he was living what you would consider a pretty normal life, as in Fabry disease wasn't affecting his day-to-day life to a noticeable extent. That's from an outside view, though. Of course, on the inside, Fabry has been impacting our family in almost every aspect. As I said, career choices, time off, medical appointments, managing Fabry treatment, so then holiday planning, social events. It's difficult to think of anything that Fabry hasn't impacted in my family, but at the same time for us, that's always been normal. But 5 years ago, my father's health has really started to decline. And that started with kidney failure. He now receives dialysis weekly and has led to cardiac issues and many other issues, probably pages and pages of medical issues which are attributable to Fabry. So, as you can probably imagine, I have experienced Fabry through both the lens of a patient and sufferer, as well as a carer for my dad. And I suppose I might just start by making some suggestions of how to manage the Fabry journey as a carer. So my suggestion to anyone out there who is a carer for someone with Fabry disease would be to take care of yourself. It's really difficult to take care of others if you are exhausted, which inevitably you will be. Managing that fatigue is important, and it looks like taking time to yourself, seeing a psychologist to talk about the feelings you're experiencing. It might mean journaling about how you're feeling, and there's so many emotions that come with being a carer that sometimes you can feel guilty about those emotions, feel guilty about being angry with a person who's got Fabry illness, being angry with the medical system. Certainly there's so many emotions, and I think it's really important to acknowledge them, and whether that's talking about it or writing about it, etc. So yeah, as a carer, my top tip would be take time for yourself, and also express how you're feeling on that journey in a healthy way. From a patient perspective, I want to share some strategies too, and those strategies are really have a key theme of trying to get a balance between acknowledging that you have an illness, acknowledging that it is going to limit you in some way, shape, or form, whilst also wanting to live your best life and wanting to live a life that you feel in control of. So it's kind of trying to find that balance is really hard, but I think it's doable, but it takes a lot of conscious choices. So as an example of that, I try to manage when I think about Fabry. So it's not something that I want to think about every morning when I get up or every night when I'm going to bed. And if I am thinking about that often, it can create a lot of anxiety. So I do see a psychologist regularly to try and manage those thoughts and control those thoughts. But in saying that, I do choose to think about Fabry when I'm making decisions and when I'm planning my future. So certainly for me, my career change and my career choices have been very much impacted by Fabry, because from a young age, my parents encouraged me to take on jobs that required my mind rather than my body, knowing that physically I need to be working jobs that aren't too taxing so that I have longevity. So certainly when I made the career change 2 years ago, part of that decision was I felt that I couldn't sustain the workload and the pressure that I was under in the legal profession. And I wanted to move to something that was perhaps more manageable, but maybe hasn't been, but that's another story. So it's certainly a factor that I have taken into consideration with careers, as well as locations. So at the moment, I'm living in a very remote part of Tasmania. There aren't a lot of medical services available here. So I know that this is brief, and something that my partner and I are already talking about is when we move back to the mainland, which will likely be in the next couple of years, where can we live that it's going to make treatment really easy and accessible? And so that's something that I plan on talking to with my genetic specialist in our upcoming appointment is, will I be eligible for treatment? When will I be eligible for treatment? And where can I live that's going to allow me to access treatment? So I have factored in Fabry disease, thinking about career options, thinking about living arrangements, and also family planning. So that's certainly something that I have been thinking about for the last few years, is how I want to start a family and how Fabry will impact that, and how I want to manage the risk of having a child with Fabry. So that's something that I've spoken to a genetic counsellor about. That's something that my partner and I have spoken about honestly. And we've made some decisions about how we want to go forward with that. So I think being able to select when you think about Fabry, so that it's in a healthy way, it helps you feel like you have control, or you have at least some control over your life. Because unfortunately, having a genetic disease means that some control has already been taken away from you. Control over how your body is functioning and how it will continue to function in the future has really been taken in part. And so I like to regain a sense of control by thinking about, through the lens of, okay, what's left that I can actually have control over, and what decisions can I make that I'll find empowering. I think that's really been a mindset which has helped me manage Fabry disease, and I would encourage people to have that mindset, or at least to consider how they're thinking about their disease when they're thinking about their disease, because the irony is that if you spend too much time thinking about it, then the disease is having an additional impact on your mental well-being that it doesn't need to, but inevitably will to some extent. So I think trying to get help with managing the mental experience of having a rare disease is super, super important. I hope that in all of that rambling, there have been moments of wisdom, and I am always happy to chat further if anyone would like to. So thank you for listening.